WildMane uploads specially curated BL stories daily. Subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss a premium story. The war ended with blood and crown fire. Listen closely. You can almost hear the thick, choking smoke finally settling over the ashes of a conquered kingdom. So the smoke is literally still rising from the ruined gates when Sao Yuhan is violently dragged across these massive marble floors that are just stained with dark ash. The defeated Omega Prince keeps his head lowered. His breathing is shallow, totally erratic. Outside those heavy iron-wrought palace doors, you can hear the terrified whispers echoing through the conquered streets. The surviving southern citizens, well, they expect their beloved prince to die long before sunrise. Why? Because the man waiting in that freezing, cavernous throne room is Kang Jiheon. The air itself is thick with the scent of ozone and spilled blood. It's this heavy, oppressive atmosphere that absolutely demands unquestioning submission from anyone who even dares to draw breath inside those walls. I mean, this wasn't just some king. This was a legendary monster, a man who had conquered vast kingdoms before he even turned 30. An alpha who destroyed rival packs and decimated ancient bloodlines without a single shred of mercy. He's the kind of ruthless ruler that people fear so deeply that even the most dominant, prideful alphas literally drop their eyes and bare their necks the second he walks in. The massive throne room falls into this terrifying, suffocating silence as armored guards roughly force Yuhan onto his trembling knees. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echo slowly above him on the dais. And then, a deep, commanding voice shatters the unbearable quiet. "Look at me." But Yuhan, clinging desperately to the absolute last shreds of his royal pride, despite his hands trembling violently, he flatly refuses. And then, in a fraction of a second, the atmosphere just violently shifts. The crushing pressure of dominant alpha pheromones floods the air. It's predatory, it's absolute. The guards release Yuhan instantly, stumbling back into the shadows out of primal, instinctual fear. Kang Jiheon crouches down slowly in front of him, every movement smooth and terrifyingly calculated. When Yuhan finally forces his eyes upward, their gazes lock. A predator alpha at the absolute peak of his dominance, staring down a defeated, shivering Omega. This heavy silence stretches endlessly between them, marked only by lingering, dangerous eye contact that literally feels like a physical weight on Yuhan's chest. Jiheon slowly reaches out a gloved hand, and Yuhan flinches wildly from his touch. The entire room just freezes. Because Jiheon, he doesn't look triumphant. He actually looks genuinely furious. Not at Yuhan, but at whoever taught this proud, beautiful prince to fear a simple touch. Jiheon's fingers stop mere inches away from the Omega's pale cheek. It is control. Pure, terrifying control. The Alpha King stands up slowly. His eyes never once leave the kneeling Omega. "He'll stay in the royal palace," he commands, his voice echoing off the cold stone. Now you can imagine the northern ministers absolutely erupt in protest. A southern Omega allowed to live beside the northern throne? It's unthinkable, deeply dangerous. But Tamram's voice cuts through that political chaos like a jagged blade of ice. "He's mine now." The sheer, heavy possessiveness dripping from those three words drops the room back into absolute, terrified silence. And it makes Yuhan's stomach twist violently with this really complicated, bitter dread. Section 1. The Royal Cage. Northern Silks and Shifting Realities. So Yuhan is fully expecting to be thrown into some freezing, rat-infested dungeon, right? He's bracing his mind and body for unimaginable cruelty, for public punishment. But instead, he finds himself surrounded by these incredibly warm, oppressively luxurious northern royal chambers. Soft, priceless northern Omega silks are waiting for him, almost mocking his anticipation of pain. He stands rigid by the frost-covered balcony windows, silently bracing for the executioner. But when the heavy oak door finally opens, Tanarim enters entirely alone, instantly making the vast room feel suffocatingly small. Yuhan's defiance flares up, hot and bright. "If you're here to threaten me, just finish it quickly," he says bitterly, his chin raised. "You slaughtered my kingdom. My father protected our people." Tanarim steps closer, his gaze brutally cold, and systematically shatters Yuhan's entire worldview. The Southern King wasn't a noble protector at all. He had been maliciously poisoning northern trade routes for years, and worse, He'd secretly sold innocent southern omegas to brutal western packs just for sheer profit. "I executed the nobles responsible yesterday," Tanaram says quietly, watching Yuhan carefully. Yuhan completely freezes. The horrific, nauseating reality of his own corrupt court, it just violently crashes down around him in an instant. "You weren't dragged here as punishment," Taram tells him, his voice dropping right into that quiet space between them. "Then why am I here?" Yuhan demands, his pulses racing, his mind frantically trying to rebuild the walls the Alpha just utterly demolished. The Alpha King steps far too close. The overwhelming pressure of his dominant pheromones, sharp, biting winter cedar, mixed with a dark, suffocating smoke, wraps tightly around Yuhan's terrified senses, making his breath hitch painfully. "Because the moment I saw you," Taram's strong jaw tightens visibly. He looks like a man fighting a violent internal war against his own devastating obsession. "I wanted you beside me." It is an absolutely insane confession. A dangerously attractive, terrifyingly raw admission from a lethal predator who just burned an entire kingdom to the ground simply to claim his prize. Slowly, agonizingly, days bleed into these incredibly long, tense weeks. The heavy, volatile tension in the vast palace becomes a daily, suffocating routine. First comes the humiliating surrender. Then, the explosive shockwave that tears violently through the foundations of the kingdom, the engagement announcement. The sheer weight of an Omega from the defeated South being ordered to sit beside the Northern throne. It pushes the political tension to a deadly boiling point. The proud Northern nobles absolutely despise Yuhan's presence, whispering venom in the corridors, while desperate Southern rebels start plotting in the deep shadows to steal their prince back from the wolf's den. But here's the crazy part. Inside those impenetrable palace walls, Yuhan's daily reality is just maddeningly confusing. There are literally no iron chains holding him to the bed, no locked doors keeping him trapped in his lavish rooms, no brutal, forced scenting to violently mark him as the Alpha's claimed property. He's given this sweeping, unexpected freedom. The fiercely loyal palace staff even bow their heads to him with genuine respect. And strangely enough, this terrifying gentleness only fuels Yuhan's deeply wounded, proud defiance. He constantly seeks the king out, confronting Taram directly in the grand halls, bitterly accusing him of crafting a gilded cage of psychological humiliation. But the Alpha King? He only sees his actions as providing absolute, impenetrable protection. Eventually, Taram corners him late at night in the royal library. The atmosphere instantly shifts from a calm ruler to a deeply territorial, predatory Alpha systematically breaking down the Omega's emotional walls. He steps right into Yuhan's personal space, his imposing frame completely blocking the only exit. His voice drops into this dark, territorial hum, leaving absolutely no room for escape. "You still don't understand the reality of your situation," Taram warns, his eyes intensely focused on Yuhan's parted lips. "You're flawlessly beautiful, intimidatingly intelligent, fiercely proud, and reckless enough to challenge me directly when kings cower at my feet. Do you really think you're invisible? Every single Alpha in this entire kingdom notices you." Taram leans in impossibly close. His eyes are pitch black, just utterly consumed with this terrifying possessiveness. He says, "I would rather burn this entire palace to the ground than let someone else touch you." Yuhan's breath completely catches in his throat. His heart pounds violently against his ribs. His body is instinctively reacting to the sheer, terrifying weight of that raw devotion, long before his rational mind can even process what it truly means.
Section 2. Territorial Instincts. The Winter Banquet.
Winter hits the north brutally, burying the sprawling palace gardens in thick silver snow, while treacherous daggers linger in the shadows of the grand hall. And that terrifying territorial obsession Tarim just confessed to, it's about to be violently tested. Inside, the massive hall is filled with loud music, spilled wine, and fake smiles. But that fragile peace snaps entirely in 3 chaotic, heart-stopping steps. First, an arrogant, drunken northern noble, foolishly emboldened by the massive crowd, violently grabs Yuhan's delicate wrist, sneering some vile insult at the southern Omega. Second, a violent, predatory, suffocating pheromone storm aggressively crashes through the banquet hall, literally choking the cold air from everyone's lungs as the king perceives a threat to his mate. And third, absolute, unhinged violence. In a terrifying blur of motion, the screaming noble is ripped away from Yuhan and slammed bone-crushingly against the cold marble floor directly beneath the king's merciless hand. He said no, Tarim growls. His voice is chillingly calm, but his eyes look genuinely, unrepentantly murderous. After violently banishing the trembling noble from the court forever with a threat that literally shakes the stone foundations of the room, Tarim turns slowly back to Yuhan, and that bloodthirsty monster instantly vanishes. In a flash, his brutal expression softens completely into something agonizingly vulnerable. "Did he hurt you?" he asks, his hands actually hovering, like he's afraid to touch him. The shocking, desperate carefulness in his deep voice shatters something deep and ancient inside Yuhan. Because for the absolute first time in his entire life, someone is violently protecting him purely for him. Not for his royal title, not for political gain. Just him. Section 3. Winter Cedar. The Alpha's Surrender. Later that very night, the freezing northern wind is just howling outside the thick, frost-covered palace windows. Yuhan can't sleep. His mind is racing. This ruthless, violently bloody king who conquered the known world is treating him like something unimaginably precious. Then, a soft, incredibly gentle knock at the door. Tarim enters the Omega's chambers entirely alone, deliberately leaving his heavy royal guards behind, carrying absolutely nothing but a simple wooden tray of warm tea. They sit together in the dim, flickering candlelight, the heavy burdens of their royal titles slowly stripping away, until there are only two incredibly vulnerable men left sitting in the quiet dark. Yuhan can't bear the heavy, emotional confusion in his chest for a single second longer. He looks directly at the most powerful, dangerous man on the entire continent, and finally asks the one terrifying question burning a hole straight through his chest. Why me? Tarim doesn't answer right away. He just stares silently out at the endlessly falling snow. This long, incredibly heavy silence stretches between them, filled with decades of unspoken isolation. Then, with a lonely, bone-deep exhaustion he has never shown to another living soul, he finally confesses. Because when everyone else in the world looked at me like a terrifying king, you looked at me like a man. Tarim smiles softly, this deeply tragic, self-deprecating expression. You glared at me with such pure defiance during the surrender ceremony. I knew instantly that you hated me. And that was the problem, because I couldn't look away. Always so painstakingly careful, Tarim gently reaches out to adjust a thick fur blanket that's slipping from Yuhan's shivering shoulders. For a fraction of a second, their bare fingers brush. It's a pure accident. But the biological bond reaction, it hits them instantly, like a bolt of raw lightning. Sharp, ragged inhales fill the quiet room. Blinding, electric warmth explodes straight through Yuhan's chest, violently surging his deeply buried Omega instincts forward. The air in the room grows impossibly thick, completely intoxicated by the rich, colliding explosion of the Alpha's sharp winter cedar and the Omega's sweet, frantic, blossoming scent. In that single, overwhelming rush of intoxicating scent, the Alpha King's famously legendary ironclad control finally completely cracks. His eyes darken dangerously as the obsessive predator violently surfaces against his conscious will. Yuhan. The raw, broken way Talarim speaks his name is just ruin, desperate, agonizingly obsessed. The tension is suddenly unbearable, thick enough to physically suffocate them both. Breathing heavily, Talarim physically steps back, his hands balled into white-knuckled fists. I should leave, he forces out through gritted teeth, desperately trying to lock the possessive monster back inside its cage before he loses his mind and consumes the Omega completely. But before the terrified, obsessed king can force himself to turn away and walk out that door, Yuhan reaches out. His trembling, slender fingers softly but firmly grab the thick fabric of Tarim's royal sleeve. It is the ultimate, undeniable emotional surrender. Yuhan looks up, his deeply wounded pride falling away completely in the warmth of the candlelight, and shatters the heavy silence with a single, undeniable word: stay. Slowly, reverently, the massive Alpha King sits back down beside him, close enough to share their body heat, close enough for their rapidly surging scents to finally, perfectly entwine into one. A dangerous, incredibly beautiful comfort slowly settles over the quiet room. Outside, the freezing silver snow continues to brutally bury the divided kingdom. But inside the absolute warmth of those thick palace walls, the most feared, ruthless alpha in the world quietly fell hopelessly, irreversibly, in love with his beautiful enemy Omega. But with a massive kingdom still deeply divided, and treacherous southern rebels actively plotting in the freezing snow, you have to wonder, how long can a terrifying monster truly keep his precious, fragile cage from utterly shattering? WildMane uploads specially curated BL stories daily. Subscribe for more BL stories and comment what type of story you want next.